The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Petaluma, California. When Rebecca Foster stepped down from the stagecoach, her three exhausted children huddled close to her skirts like chicks sheltering under a hen's protective wings. The year was 1875, and the journey from St. Louis had drained what little remained of her spirit after burying her husband 3 months prior. "Welcome to Petaluma, madam," the stagecoach driver said, tipping his hat as he handed down her worn carpetbag. "Need help with those trunks?" Rebecca's golden brown hair, once her pride, hung limply around her pale face. At 28, grief had etched fine lines around her eyes, but couldn't diminish her natural beauty. "Thank you, sir," she managed, her voice barely audible above the bustle of the small but thriving town. 8-year-old Thomas, her eldest, squared his small shoulders and declared, "I can help, Mama," though his thin arms could hardly lift his own small bag. 6-year-old Mary clutched her rag doll tighter, hiding her face against Rebecca's skirt, while 4-year-old Lily, thumb firmly in mouth, stared wide-eyed at the unfamiliar surroundings. Mrs. Foster, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, approached. "I'm Mrs. Abernathy from the general store. Your brother-in-law sent word you'd be arriving today." Rebecca nodded gratefully. Her late husband's brother, George Foster, had offered them temporary shelter at his small house on the edge of town until she could sort herself out, as his letter had phrased it. The unspoken message was clear enough: their welcome had an expiration date. "He's sorry he couldn't meet you himself," Mrs. Abernathy continued, "but there's been trouble at the mine. Nothing serious," she added quickly, seeing Rebecca's alarmed expression. "Just the usual disagreements between the men. My husband has arranged for your things to be delivered to George's place, and I can take you there now." As they prepared to leave, the unmistakable sound of horses approaching made them turn. 3 riders entered the town, trail dust coating their clothes and faces. The lead rider, a tall man with broad shoulders, pulled his horse to a stop nearby. "Afternoon, Mrs. Abernathy," he called, his deep voice carrying across the street. He removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and a face weathered by years under the open sky. "Mr. Xavier." "Perfect timing." Mrs. Abernathy beckoned him over. "This is Mrs. Foster and her children, just arrived from back east. They're staying at George Foster's place." The man's eyes, blue as a summer sky, met Rebecca's. For a moment neither spoke, then he inclined his head respectfully. "Wade Xavier, madam. I run the Double X Ranch north of town. Mr. Xavier knows everyone worth knowing in these parts," Mrs. Abernathy explained. "And he's the best neighbor you could ask for in times of trouble." Wade Xavier's gaze traveled from Rebecca to each of her children, lingering on little Lily, who had stepped forward, curiosity momentarily overcoming her shyness. "You got little ones," he observed softly, his expression softening as he dismounted and crouched down to Lily's level. "How do you do, miss?" To Rebecca's surprise, Lily removed her thumb from her mouth. "I'm Lily," she announced. "I'm 4. Wade's smile transformed his face, erasing years of hardship. "That's a mighty fine age to be," he told her seriously. "And who might these other fine young folks be?" As Thomas introduced himself and his sisters with careful politeness, Rebecca noticed the gentleness in Wade's manner. Despite his imposing size and the pistol strapped to his hip, there was nothing threatening about him. "We heard about your husband's passing, madam," Wade said when the introductions were complete, rising to his full height again. "I'm mighty sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Rebecca replied automatically, the words worn smooth by repetition over the past months. "George's place is quite small," Mrs. Abernathy fretted. "I don't know how comfortable you'll all be there." Wade cleared his throat. My ranch house has plenty of room, Mrs. Foster, if George's arrangements don't suit. Been meaning to offer him some help anyway, what with him being so busy at the mine. Rebecca stiffened slightly. That's very kind, Mr. Xavier, but we couldn't possibly impose. He shook his head, those blue eyes holding hers. No imposition, madam. The house was built for a family. Been just me rattling around in it these past 5 years. His gaze took in all 3 children again, and something in his expression made Rebecca's heart squeeze strangely. I've got space in my heart for all, he said simply, then looked embarrassed at his own words. That is to say, you'd be welcome if things don't work out at George's. Before Rebecca could respond, a commotion erupted down the street. A man came running toward them, shouting something about a fire at the livery stable. Wade was instantly alert, issuing orders to his companions who had remained mounted. "Excuse me, ladies," he said, swinging back onto his horse. "Duty calls." He tipped his hat once more and was gone in a cloud of dust, riding toward the growing commotion. Mrs. Abernathy sighed. That man is always first to help when trouble comes. Now, let's get you settled, shall we? As they made their way toward George's house, Rebecca found herself thinking of Wade Xavier's unexpected offer and the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her children. "I've got space in my heart for all," he'd said. What an unusual thing for a stranger to say to a widow with 3 children. The small house that awaited them proved to be even more cramped than Mrs. Abernathy had implied. 2 rooms total, with a lean-to kitchen added as an afterthought. George Foster, a balding man of 40 with none of his late brother's charm, greeted them with obvious reluctance. "Didn't expect you'd have so many trunks," he commented disapprovingly. "There's barely room to turn around in here as it is." Rebecca bit back a retort. These trunks contained all that remained of their former life: her husband James's books, her mother's china, the children's few toys. "We won't be in your way for long," she assured him. "I intend to find work as soon as possible," George snorted. "Work? What skills do you have that anyone here would pay for?" His gaze traveled over her hands, soft and uncalloused. "This isn't St. Louis, Rebecca. People here work hard for every penny." "I can sew, cook, keep accounts," she countered, her chin rising. "I taught school before I married James." "Well, we've got a school teacher already," George informed her. "Young fellow from San Francisco, does a fair job of it from what I hear." He scratched his head. "Might be Mrs. Hollister at the hotel needs help with laundry and such." The thought of washing strangers' linens wasn't appealing, but Rebecca nodded. "I'll speak with her tomorrow." The children, exhausted from the journey, were soon asleep on pallets laid out in the small front room. Rebecca sat on the edge of the lone chair, watching them breathe, trying to gather her thoughts. George cleared his throat. "James never was much for planning ahead," he said abruptly. "Left you in a difficult spot, didn't he? No insurance, no savings." Rebecca's hands tightened in her lap. "The medical bills took everything," she said quietly. "He was ill for a long time." "Still, a man should provide for his family better," George insisted. "Now you've come all this way, and for what? I can't keep you, Rebecca. I've got my own concerns." "I understand," she said, though what she understood most clearly was that her brother-in-law resented their presence already. "As I said, we won't impose for long." That night, lying beside her children on the hard floor, Rebecca allowed herself to cry silently into her folded shawl. The future had never looked so uncertain. She thought of Wade Xavier's unexpected offer, the kindness in his eyes when he spoke to her children. A ranch house with plenty of room, he'd said. But what would people think of a widow and her children living under a bachelor's roof? Even in the Wild West, some proprieties had to be observed. The following morning, Rebecca rose early, determined to begin her search for employment. She dressed the children carefully in their second-best clothes, braided the girl's hair, and made sure Thomas's collar was straight. "We're going to explore the town today," she told them, trying to inject enthusiasm into her voice. "And while we do, I'll be looking for work so we can have our own place soon." "Will we see that cowboy again, Mama?" Lily asked, her face brightening. "The one with the nice eyes." Rebecca felt herself blush. "Mr. Xavier, perhaps. He seems to be well known in Petaluma." George had already left for the mine, leaving a note that indicated they should fend for themselves for meals. Rebecca counted the few coins in her purse, calculating how long they would last if she bought only the bare necessities. Petaluma proved to be a friendlier town than her initial impression had suggested. People nodded and greeted them as they walked down the main street. Mrs. Abernathy waved them into the general store and insisted on giving the children each a peppermint stick. On the house. "Have you spoken to Mrs. Hollister at the hotel yet?" she asked Rebecca. "That's my next stop," Rebecca replied. "Do you know if any other businesses might be hiring?" Mrs. Abernathy considered. "The dressmaker, Mrs. Chen, might need help. She's been complaining about falling behind on orders since her daughter married and moved to Sacramento." Rebecca's spirits lifted. Sewing would be far preferable to laundry work. "Thank you, I'll inquire there as well." As they exited the general store, Thomas suddenly pointed. "Look, Mama. It's Mr. Xavier." Sure enough, Wade Xavier was emerging from the sheriff's office across the street. He spotted them immediately and touched his hat brim in greeting before crossing over. "Mrs. Foster, children," he said, his smile warming his tanned face. "Settling in all right?" "We're exploring," Mary informed him solemnly. "Mama's going to find work." Wade's gaze shifted to Rebecca. "Is that so? Find anything promising yet?" "I'm just beginning my search," she admitted. "I plan to speak with Mrs. Hollister at the hotel and perhaps the dressmaker." Wade nodded thoughtfully. "Mrs. Chen does fine work, but she's getting on in years. Would likely welcome skilled help." He hesitated. "If you don't mind my asking, how are things at George's place?" Rebecca glanced at the children who were occupied with their candy. "Cramped," she said quietly. "But we're grateful for the shelter." "I meant what I said yesterday," Wade told her. "My offer stands. The ranch house has 4 bedrooms going unused, a proper kitchen, and plenty of space for children to run around." He paused. "I understand it might seem improper, but I could stay in the bunkhouse with my men. You and the children would have the main house to yourselves." The generosity of the offer took Rebecca's breath away. "Why would you do that for strangers, Mr. Xavier?" Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of old pain, quickly masked. "I built that house for a family that never came to be," he said simply. "Seems a waste to let it stand empty when there's folks in need." Before Rebecca could respond, a woman's voice called out, "Wade Xavier, is that you bothering these newcomers?" A tall, striking woman with silver-threaded black hair approached, her expression severe but her eyes kind. Wade's face broke into a genuine smile. "Morning, Aunt Harriet." "Just making acquaintances. This is Mrs. Foster and her children, recently arrived from St. Louis." Harriet Xavier, for the family resemblance was unmistakable in the shape of her eyes, and the set of her jaw surveyed Rebecca and the children with interest. "So you're James Foster's widow." "I knew your husband briefly when he first came west to survey for the mining company. A gentleman, as I recall." "You knew James?" Rebecca was startled. "Petaluma's not so large that strangers pass unnoticed," Harriet replied. "And I make it my business to know what happens in this town." She turned to Wade. "You're coming to Sunday dinner tomorrow?" "Wouldn't miss it," he assured her. Harriet's gaze returned to Rebecca. "You should join us, Mrs. Foster. Bring the children. I always cook too much, and it would give you a proper welcome to Petaluma." "That's very kind, but no buts," Harriet interrupted firmly. "Wade will collect you at noon. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have choir practice to attend." With a nod that somehow included them all equally, she continued on her way. Wade chuckled. "My aunt doesn't believe in taking no for an answer. She raised me after my parents died, and she's been giving orders ever since." His expression grew more serious. "But she's right, you should come. You'll meet some good people, make connections that might help with finding work." Put that way, Rebecca could hardly refuse. "Thank you. We would be honored to accept." "Excellent." Wade looked genuinely pleased. "Now, can I escort you ladies and young Master Thomas to the hotel? Mrs. Hollister can be a bit intimidating on first meeting." With Wade accompanying them, their reception at the Petaluma Hotel was indeed warmer than it might have been otherwise. Mrs. Hollister, a widow herself though considerably older than Rebecca, ran her establishment with military precision. "I do need help," she acknowledged after Wade had made the introductions and tactfully withdrawn to speak with the desk clerk. "The girl who's been doing the laundry and helping in the kitchen is getting married next month. But it's hard work, Mrs. Foster, and the pay isn't much." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Rebecca assured her, though her heart sank at the thought of long hours away from her children. "But I would need to arrange care for my little ones." Mrs. Hollister frowned. "That does complicate matters. I need someone here from dawn till dusk most days." From across the lobby, Wade rejoined the conversation. Mrs. Abernathy mentioned that Mrs. Chen might need help with her dressmaking. Could be a better fit, especially if she'd allow the children to be there while you work. Mrs. Hollister nodded slowly. "That's not a bad idea. Sun Li Chen is getting too old to handle all the work herself, and her eyesight isn't what it was." Rebecca felt a surge of hope. "I'm a skilled seamstress. My mother taught me, and I made all our clothes back in St. Louis." "Well then, you should speak with her directly," Mrs. Hollister decided. "Her shop is just down the street, the small building with blue trim beside the hardware store." Wade offered to continue escorting them, but Rebecca, feeling she had already imposed too much on his time, declined politely. "You've been more than kind, Mr. Xavier. I'm sure you have your own business to attend to." He accepted this with good grace. "I'll see you tomorrow at noon, then, for dinner at Aunt Harriet's." As he strode away, Rebecca noticed several townspeople greeting him with evident respect and affection. Clearly, Wade Xavier was well regarded in Petaluma. Mrs. Chen's dressmaking shop proved to be a haven of orderly creativity. Bolts of fabric lined the walls, neatly arranged by color and type. A work table dominated the center of the room, currently covered with the pieces of what would become a wedding dress. The proprietress herself, a tiny woman with a cloud of white hair and surprisingly few wrinkles for her evident age, was bent over her work, her nimble fingers placing pins with exacting precision. She looked up as the bell over the door announced their entrance, sharp dark eyes taking in Rebecca and the children at a glance. "New customers?" she inquired, her English perfectly clear though accented. "Actually, I've come to inquire about employment," Rebecca explained. "I understand you might need assistance with your sewing." Mrs. Chen set down her pins carefully. "You sew?" The question contained a world of skepticism. In answer, Rebecca opened her reticule and withdrew a small sampler of stitches. She always carried a habit from her days of seeking sewing work before her marriage. The neat rows of different stitches, from basic running stitch to complex decorative work, represented hours of practice and genuine skill. Mrs. Chen's expression changed as she examined the sampler. "Very good," she acknowledged, raising her eyes to Rebecca's face. "But I cannot pay much." "I understand," Rebecca said, "but I need work, and I would much rather use my needle than do laundry." A smile flickered across the older woman's face. "Yes, better to create than to clean." She glanced at the children, who were standing remarkably still, having been instructed to touch nothing. "The little ones. They would be here while you work," Rebecca nodded. "They're well behaved, and Thomas is old enough to watch his sisters if necessary. They could sit quietly in a corner." Mrs. Chen considered this, then nodded decisively. "We try." "You come tomorrow after church, show me what you can do. If good, we make arrangement." Relief washed through Rebecca. It wasn't a firm offer, but it was a chance to use her skills rather than scrubbing linens, a chance to keep her children with her, a chance to begin rebuilding their lives. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I'll be here tomorrow afternoon." As they left the shop, Thomas looked up at his mother. "Are we really going to have dinner at that lady's house tomorrow, the one who knows Mr. Xavier?" "Yes, Miss Harriet has invited us. It was kind of her." Mary's face brightened. "Will there be other children there?" "I don't know, sweetheart. We'll find out tomorrow." Lily, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly announced, "I like Mr. Xavier. He smells like horses and candy." Rebecca couldn't help laughing. "Does he now? And how would you know about the candy?" "He gave me a piece when you were talking to Mrs. Abernathy," Lily informed her. "He said not to tell because it would spoil my dinner, but that was yesterday, so it's all right to tell now." Rebecca shook her head, amused despite herself. Wade Xavier was certainly making an impression on her family. The rest of the day passed in exploring their new surroundings and acquiring a few essential provisions with their limited funds. By evening, when they returned to George's house, Rebecca was exhausted but cautiously optimistic. George himself was in a sour mood when he returned from the mine, complaining about difficult working conditions and unreasonable expectations from the mine owners back in San Francisco. "They want more production with fewer men," he grumbled, washing up for the simple supper Rebecca had prepared. "As if gold just leaps out of the rock on command." "Is the mine very profitable?" Rebecca asked, partly from genuine interest and partly to maintain the conversation. George shrugged. "Profitable enough to keep running, not profitable enough to make anyone rich, least of all those of us doing the actual work." He eyed her curiously. "How was your day? Find any work?" Rebecca told him about Mrs. Chen and the trial period arranged for the next day. George seemed surprised. "Sun Li Chen is particular about who she lets touch her work," he commented. "Must have seen something in you she liked." He hesitated, then added grudgingly, "James always said you had clever hands." The mention of her late husband brought a familiar ache to Rebecca's chest. "He was always very supportive of my sewing." George grunted non-committally, then changed the subject. "Saw Xavier at the assay office today. He mentioned inviting you to Harriet's for Sunday dinner." His tone contained a note of disapproval. "Moving fast, aren't you?" Rebecca stiffened. Miss Harriet extended the invitation herself. It seemed impolite to refuse. "Just be careful," George warned. "Wade Xavier has a reputation as a man who knows what he wants and goes after it. Been without a wife too long, if you ask me. Might see a ready-made family as a convenient solution." The implication was clear, and Rebecca felt her cheeks warm with indignation. "Mr. Xavier has been nothing but a gentleman. He merely offered assistance to newcomers, as any good neighbor might." George raised his eyebrows but said nothing more on the subject. After he had retired to the single bedroom, leaving Rebecca and the children to their pallets in the main room, she lay awake pondering his words. Was Wade Xavier's kindness motivated by something other than simple neighborliness? The thought was both unsettling and, if she was honest with herself, not entirely unwelcome. It had been a long time since a man had looked at her with anything resembling interest. James's illness had consumed their last years together, transforming their marriage into something more akin to nurse and patient than husband and wife. But she hardly knew Wade Xavier, and her primary concern had to be the welfare of her children. Getting involved with someone new, especially so soon after James's death, was out of the question. With that firmly decided, Rebecca finally drifted off to sleep. Sunday dawned clear and warm, a perfect California spring day. Rebecca dressed the children in their best clothes, somewhat worn but still presentable, and did her best with her own appearance. Her black morning dress, simplified for travel, was serviceable but far from fashionable. She added her one remaining piece of good jewelry, a cameo brooch that had belonged to her grandmother, and pinned her hair up as neatly as she could manage without a lady's maid. George had left early, muttering something about business in town before church. Rebecca gathered the children and set out for the small white church visible from almost anywhere in Petaluma. The service was simple but sincere, led by a young minister whose enthusiasm made up for what he lacked in experience. Rebecca noticed Wade sitting with his aunt several pews ahead, his broad shoulders easily recognizable even from behind. Harriet Xavier, her silver-streaked hair arranged elegantly beneath a modest hat, sat straight as a ramrod, nodding occasionally at the minister's more salient points. After the service, there was the usual mingling of congregants outside the church doors. Rebecca found herself introduced to what seemed like half the town, names and faces blurring together in a whirl of well-intentioned curiosity about the widow from back east. Wade appeared at her elbow just as she was beginning to feel overwhelmed, his presence somehow creating a small pocket of calm amid the bustle. "Ready for that dinner?" he asked, smiling down at the children. "Aunt Harriet has already gone ahead to make sure everything's perfect." "We don't want to be any trouble," Rebecca began, but Wade shook his head. "No trouble at all. My aunt loves having guests, especially children." He crouched down to Lily's level. "She's made her special apple pie for dessert, best in 3 counties, or so she claims." Lily's eyes widened. "Better than Mama's?" Wade glanced up at Rebecca, his blue eyes twinkling. "I haven't had the pleasure of trying your Mama's pie yet, so I couldn't say. Perhaps someday we'll have to hold a contest." The thought of baking pies for Wade Xavier made Rebecca's cheeks warm inexplicably. "We should be going if your aunt is expecting us." Wade straightened, offering his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. "My wagon's just over there. Hope you don't mind riding in a ranch vehicle. It's not as elegant as a proper carriage." The wagon turned out to be a well-maintained buckboard with clean blankets spread over the seats. Wade helped the children up first, then extended his hand to Rebecca. His grip was warm and strong as he assisted her onto the seat, his touch lingering perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. Harriet Xavier's house, located on a tree-lined street on the north side of town, was a 2-story affair with a wide porch and neatly tended flower beds. As they pulled up, the front door opened, and Harriet herself emerged, now dressed in a practical but becoming blue gown that complemented her silver-streaked dark hair. "Right on time," she approved, coming down the steps to greet them. "I was beginning to think Pastor Williams would never finish his sermon today. That young man does love the sound of his own voice." "Aunt Harriet," Wade remonstrated mildly as he helped Rebecca down from the wagon. "Oh, he knows I think so." "I've told him to his face," Harriet replied without a trace of remorse. She turned her attention to the children. "Now, who do we have here? Wade told me your names, but I'm afraid I'm getting forgetful in my old age." As the children introduced themselves with careful manners, Rebecca took the opportunity to observe the interaction between Wade and his aunt. There was genuine affection there, Evident in the way, he automatically offered his arm to escort her up the steps, and in the fond exasperation with which she accepted it. Inside, the house was comfortably furnished with a blend of practical pieces and more elegant items that spoke of refined taste. Family photographs adorned the walls, and fresh flowers brightened the dining table, which was already set for the meal. "We have other guests joining us," Harriet informed them as she ushered them into the parlor. "Dr. and Mrs. Harmon, he's our local physician, and Sheriff Mitchell, if he can get away from his duties long enough to eat a proper meal." Rebecca tried to hide her dismay at the additional guests. She had expected a quiet family dinner, not a social gathering where she would be on display as the newcomer. Wade, noticing her expression, leaned close to murmur, "Don't worry. They're good people. The doctor delivered half the children in town, and Sheriff Mitchell is more interested in his food than in conversation." His reassurance, and the warm breath that accompanied it against her ear, sent an unexpected shiver down Rebecca's spine. She stepped away slightly, reminding herself of her earlier resolution. The other guests arrived shortly: the doctor and his wife, a pleasant couple in their 50s, and Sheriff Mitchell, a taciturn man with a magnificent mustache, who indeed seemed more interested in the aromas coming from the kitchen than in social niceties. Dinner itself was a more enjoyable affair than Rebecca had anticipated. The food was excellent: roast beef, potatoes, fresh vegetables, and homemade bread, and the conversation flowed easily. Dr. Harmon proved to have a dry wit that balanced his wife's more effusive nature, while Sheriff Mitchell contributed the occasional observation about town affairs between enthusiastic bites. Throughout the meal, Rebecca was acutely aware of Wade seated across from her, his attention seemingly divided equally among all the guests, yet somehow always returning to her. Each time their eyes met, she felt that same strange flutter in her chest that she'd experienced when he helped her into the wagon. The children, initially shy, gradually warmed to the company. Thomas was particularly fascinated by Sheriff Mitchell's badge, while the girls were drawn to Mrs. Harmon, who produced small crocheted animals from her pocket for them. "I always carry a few," she explained to Rebecca. "My grandchildren live in Sacramento, so I don't see them as often as I'd like. It's a pleasure to have little ones at the table again." As Harriet served her famous apple pie, which was indeed excellent, Dr. Harmon turned the conversation to Rebecca's plans. "Wade mentioned you might be working with Mrs. Chen," he said. "She's a remarkable woman. Came here during the gold rush days with her husband, who was one of the few Chinese miners to actually strike it rich. When he died, she could have returned to China in comfort, but she chose to stay and build a life here. I'm meeting with her this afternoon to demonstrate my sewing skills," Rebecca explained. "I hope we'll suit each other. If you sew half as well as you raised these well-mannered children, she'll snap you up in an instant," Harriet declared. "The woman's been complaining for months about having too much work and no qualified help." "Speaking of children," Mrs. Harmon interjected, "what arrangements will you make for them while you're working? George Foster's place is quite a walk from town." Rebecca hesitated. "I'm hoping Mrs. Chen will allow them to be with me in the shop, at least until I can make other arrangements." "Sun Li is practical above all else," Dr. Harmon said. "If the children don't disrupt her business, I imagine she'll agree." Wade, who had been quietly observing the conversation, spoke up. "My offer still stands, Mrs. Foster. The ranch house has plenty of room, and it's no trouble to bring you to town each day for your work." All eyes turned to Rebecca, making her uncomfortably aware of how such an arrangement might be perceived. "That's very generous, Mr. Xavier, but it's a sensible solution," Harriet interrupted briskly. George Foster's place is barely fit for a single man, let alone a family. Wade's house has been standing half empty for years, and the children would have space to run and play. There would be talk, Sheriff Mitchell said, his first contribution to the conversation in some time. When everyone looked at him in surprise, he shrugged. Just stating facts. People gossip. Let them, Harriet sniffed dismissively. Anyone with sense would see it's a practical arrangement. Nothing more. But it wasn't that simple, and Rebecca could see from Wade's expression that he understood her reservations. Perhaps we should leave Mrs. Foster to consider the options without pressure, he suggested gently. She's only just arrived in Petaluma, after all. Harriet looked like she might argue further, but at a glance from her nephew, she subsided with a small HMPH of disapproval. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Rebecca remained distracted, turning the dilemma over in her mind. George's cramped house versus the space and comfort Wade offered. The long daily walk to town versus convenient transportation. The propriety of a widow and her children living under a bachelor's roof versus the practical needs of her family. After the meal, while the other guests chatted over coffee in the parlor, Wade invited Rebecca to step out onto the porch for some fresh air. The children were happily engaged with a set of carved wooden animals that Harriet had produced from a cabinet, giving the adults a rare moment of uninterrupted conversation. "I want to apologize for putting you in an awkward position," Wade said as they stood at the porch railing. "Aunt Harriet means well, but she can be overly forceful at times." Rebecca smiled faintly. "She reminds me of my own aunt. Once she's decided what's best, heaven help anyone who disagrees." Wade's answering smile made her heart skip a beat. "Exactly. But I meant what I said about not wanting to pressure you. The offer is genuine, but I understand your concerns." Rebecca looked out over the neat garden, gathering her thoughts. "May I ask you something personal, Mr. Xavier?" "Wade, please. And yes, ask anything you like." "Wade, then." His name felt intimate on her lips. "You mentioned building your house for a family that never came to be. What did you mean by that?" A shadow crossed his face. "I was engaged once, about 5 years ago. Emily was her name. We planned to marry in the spring, and I built the house that winter, wanting to have it ready for her." He paused, his gaze distant. "There was an influenza outbreak. She didn't survive." "I'm so sorry," Rebecca said softly, instinctively touching his arm in sympathy. Wade glanced down at her hand, then back to her face. "Life goes on. I threw myself into building the ranch after that. It's done well, better than I expected, to be honest, but the house has always felt too empty." The confession hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Rebecca withdrew her hand, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "I should check on the children," she said, stepping back slightly. Wade nodded, respecting her retreat. "Of course. And you need to meet with Mrs. Chen this afternoon. I'll have the wagon ready whenever you're prepared to leave." The remainder of the visit passed pleasantly, though Rebecca was conscious of a new tension between herself and Wade, an awareness that had not been there before their private conversation. When it came time to depart, he helped her and the children into the wagon with the same courteous attention he'd shown earlier. Harriet embraced Rebecca warmly before they left. "Come again soon," she urged. "It's been too long since this old house heard children's laughter." As they drove toward town, the children chattered excitedly about their new acquaintances, particularly taken with Harriet's promise to teach Mary and Lily to crochet when you're settled. "She's very kind," Rebecca observed. "You're fortunate to have such a caring aunt." Wade nodded, his attention seemingly focused on guiding the horses. "She raised me after my parents died in a fire when I was 12, taught me everything important: respect, honesty, the value of hard work." He glanced at her briefly. She's not usually so forward with people she's just met. You made quite an impression. Rebecca wasn't sure how to respond to that, so she changed the subject. Will you return to your ranch after dropping us in town, eventually? I have some business with the bank first and supplies to pick up. He hesitated, then added, I'll be in town again on Wednesday for the cattle auction. Perhaps by then you'll have had time to consider my offer more thoroughly. The reminder of the difficult decision facing her dampened Rebecca's spirits somewhat. Yes, perhaps. When they reached town, Wade insisted on escorting Rebecca and the children to Mrs. Chen's shop. The dressmaker was waiting for them, her workroom noticeably tidier than it had been the previous day. You are punctual. Good, Mrs. Chen said approvingly. She nodded briefly to Wade. Mr. Xavier. Mrs. Chen, he replied with a respectful tip of his hat. I'll leave Mrs. Foster in your capable hands. To Rebecca, he added, good luck. I'm sure you'll do splendidly. After he had gone, Mrs. Chen regarded Rebecca with shrewd eyes. Wade Xavier is good man, honorable, not like some. Rebecca wasn't sure how to respond to this assessment, so she simply nodded. I've brought some samples of my work, if you'd like to see them. The next 2 hours were devoted to a thorough examination of Rebecca's sewing skills. Mrs. Chen set her increasingly difficult tasks a buttonhole, a French seam, delicate embroidery, watching with critical attention as Rebecca completed each one. Finally, the older woman sat back with a satisfied nod. You have skill. Good eyes, steady hands. I can use such help. She named a wage that, while modest, would be enough to support Rebecca and the children if they lived frugally. Thank you, Rebecca said sincerely. When would you like me to start? Tomorrow, Mrs. Chen replied decisively. 8 o'clock. We have wedding dress to finish this week. Her gaze shifted to the children who had been quietly playing in a corner with some scraps of fabric. The little ones, they can come but must not disturb work. They won't, Rebecca promised, relief washing through her. They understand the importance of being well behaved. Mrs. Chen nodded. Children need discipline, structure. Good you teach them. She paused, then added unexpectedly, You stay with George Foster now. Rebecca confirmed this, wondering at the question. The dressmaker's expression remained neutral, but there was a hint of disapproval in her voice. His house very small, not good for children. It's temporary, Rebecca assured her, until we can afford something more suitable. Mrs. Chen made a non-committal sound. Wade Xavier has big house, many rooms, he offered, yes. Surprised at how quickly news traveled in Petaluma, Rebecca nodded reluctantly. You should accept, Mrs. Chen stated as if it were the most obvious conclusion. Practical solution. Xavier is honorable man, as I said. No impropriety if he stays in bunkhouse. You think so? Rebecca couldn't hide her uncertainty. I worry about appearances, about what people might say. Mrs. Chen waved a dismissive hand. People always talk. Better to do what is right for children than worry about gossip. She fixed Rebecca with a penetrating look. I lived in this town 30 years. Survived because I care about what is right, not what others think. It was perhaps the longest speech the older woman had made since their acquaintance began, and it left Rebecca thoughtful as she gathered the children to return to George's house. The walk was longer than she remembered, or perhaps she was simply tired from the events of the day. By the time they reached the small house, the children were dragging their feet, and Rebecca herself felt exhausted. George was not at home, but a note on the table informed them that he would be out late on business, and they shouldn't wait up. Rebecca prepared a simple supper from their limited provisions, her mind still churning with the decision before her. As she tucked the children into their makeshift beds that night, Thomas asked unexpectedly, Are we going to live at Mr. Xavier's house, Mama? Rebecca sat back on her heels, surprised. "Why do you ask that?" Thomas shrugged. "I heard him talking to Miss Harriet about fixing up a room for me. And he asked what color Mary and Lily might like for curtains." The revelation that Wade was already making preparations, apparently confident that she would accept his offer, should have irritated Rebecca. Instead, she found herself touched by his thoughtfulness. "Would you like to live there?" she asked carefully. "It would be very different from what we're used to." Thomas considered this seriously. "It's nicer than here, and there'd be horses. Mr. Xavier said he might teach me to ride." From her pallet, Mary chimed in drowsily, "Miss Harriet said there's a garden with real flowers. And a kitchen with a big stove for baking cookies." Even Lily, half asleep, murmured, "I like Mr. Xavier. He smells nice." Rebecca smoothed back her youngest daughter's hair. "Go to sleep now. We'll talk more about it tomorrow." But as she prepared for bed herself, she knew the decision had essentially been made. The children's clear preference, combined with the practical advantages and the unexpected endorsements from both Harriet Xavier and Mrs. Chen, outweighed her concerns about propriety. Tomorrow, she would begin her new job, and by Wednesday, when Wade returned to town, she would have an answer for him. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, and Rebecca rose early to prepare the children for the day. George had already left for the mine, leaving the house silent except for the familiar sounds of her family's morning routine. "Remember what I told you," she reminded the children as they walked to town. "You must be very quiet and well-behaved in Mrs. Chen's shop. If you're not, you'll have to stay with Uncle George during the day." This prospect was apparently unappealing enough to ensure their cooperation. When they arrived at the dressmaking shop, all three children were on their best behavior, greeting Mrs. Chen politely and settling into the corner that had been prepared for them, complete with a small table and some picture books. The day passed in a blur of precise stitches and careful measurements. Mrs. Chen proved to be a demanding but fair employer, praising good work and patiently demonstrating techniques when needed. By the end of the day, Rebecca had helped complete the bodice of the wedding dress and begun work on the intricate lace overlay for the sleeves. "Good work, Mrs. Chen approved as they prepared to close the shop. "You come back tomorrow, same time." Tuesday followed a similar pattern, though Rebecca found herself frequently thinking about Wade and wondering if he was indeed preparing rooms in his house for her children. The presumption should have bothered her, but instead, she found herself imagining what those rooms might look like, sunny and spacious, perhaps, with windows overlooking the ranch lands. Wednesday arrived with a sense of anticipation that Rebecca tried her best to suppress. Wade would be in town for the cattle auction, and she would give him her answer. The decision itself was no longer in doubt. She would accept his offer. But the prospect of telling him so, of committing to this significant change in their lives, left her with fluttering nerves. The auction was held in a field at the edge of town, and Rebecca could hear the commotion, the lowing of cattle, the shouts of cowboys, the auctioneer's rapid-fire delivery from Mrs. Chen's shop. Shortly after noon, the bell above the shop door jingled and Wade entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. "Ladies," he greeted them, nodding respectfully to Mrs. Chen before his gaze settled on Rebecca. "Hope I'm not interrupting important work." "Lunch break now, Mrs. Chen announced, setting aside the sleeve she had been working on. 1 hour. The statement was clearly meant as permission for Rebecca to step away. Wade's smile was hopeful as he turned back to Rebecca. "Might I buy you and the children some lunch at the hotel? Mrs. Hollister makes an excellent beef stew on Wednesdays." Rebecca glanced at the children who were looking up with eager expressions. "That would be lovely, thank you." As they walked the short distance to the hotel, Wade inquired about her first days of employment. "Is Mrs. Chen working you too hard. She has quite a reputation for perfectionism. Rebecca shook her head. She's demanding but fair, and very skilled. I've already learned several techniques I didn't know before. And the children, they're comfortable there, surprisingly so. Mrs. Chen provided them with some fabric scraps to play with, and she even showed Mary how to make a simple doll yesterday. Rebecca hesitated, then added, "She speaks very highly of you, by the way." Wade looked genuinely surprised. "Does she? She's always seemed rather reserved with me." "Nevertheless, she called you an honorable man and suggested I accept your offer of housing." This revelation clearly pleased him. Did she now? High praise indeed coming from Mrs. Chen. He glanced down at her. "And have you reached a decision on that matter?" They had reached the hotel and Rebecca paused at the entrance. "I have. If your offer still stands, we would be grateful to accept it." The smile that transformed Wade's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "It absolutely still stands." In fact, he stopped, seeming almost embarrassed. "Well, I might have already started preparing rooms, just in case." "So Thomas mentioned," Rebecca said, unable to suppress a smile of her own. "Something about curtain colors for the girls." Wade had the grace to look chagrined. "Was that presumptuous of me? Aunt Harriet suggested I should have everything ready to make the transition easier if you agreed." "It was thoughtful," Rebecca assured him, touched by his consideration. "When did you have in mind for us to move?" "Whenever suits you," Wade replied promptly. "The rooms are ready now, but I understand if you need time to make arrangements with George." Rebecca thought of the cramped quarters, George's evident resentment of their presence, and the long daily walk to town. "Would this weekend be too soon?" "Not at all. I'll come with the wagon on Saturday morning if that works for you." With that settled, they entered the hotel dining room, where Mrs. Hollister herself showed them to a table. The meal that followed was pleasant, the stew indeed excellent as Wade had promised. The children, initially subdued in the formal setting, gradually relaxed and began to ask Wade questions about the ranch. Did he have many horses? Were there chickens? Could they have a garden of their own? Wade answered each question with serious consideration, as if their childish concerns were as important as any business matter. "There are 10 horses currently, including my own mount, Thunder," he told Thomas. "And yes, we keep chickens for eggs, about 2 dozen hens and 1 very proud rooster. As for a garden," he added, looking at Mary, "there's already a vegetable patch behind the house, but plenty of room for flowers too, if that's what you'd like." By the time they returned to Mrs. Chen's shop, Rebecca felt more confident in her decision than ever. Wade's genuine interest in the children, his thoughtfulness in preparing for their arrival, and the natural ease with which he interacted with her family, all suggested that this arrangement, unconventional though it might be, was the right choice. "I'll see you Saturday then," Wade said as he prepared to leave. 8 o'clock suit you?" Rebecca nodded. "We'll be ready." When she told George of their plans that evening, his reaction was mixed relief at the prospect of regaining his space, coupled with disapproval of the arrangement itself. "People will talk," he warned, echoing Sheriff Mitchell's words. "A widow and her children living under a bachelor's roof, it's not proper." "Mr. Xavier will be staying in the bunkhouse with his ranch hands," Rebecca countered. "And Mrs. Chen, Miss Xavier, and Dr. and Mrs. Harmon all see nothing improper in the arrangement." George snorted. "Of course Harriet Xavier approves. She's been trying to get her nephew married off for years. As for the others, well, I suppose times are changing." He shrugged. "It's your reputation, Rebecca. Just don't come crying to me if it suffers." Rebecca lifted her chin. "I'm more concerned with providing a decent home for my children than with idle gossip." The remaining days before Saturday passed in a flurry of preparations. There wasn't much packing to be done, as most of their belongings remained in the trunks that had traveled with them from St. Louis. Still, Rebecca felt a growing anticipation as the day of the move approached. Saturday morning arrived clear and cool, with a hint of fog that burned off as the sun rose higher. The children were up early, too excited to sleep, checking and rechecking that their few treasures were safely stowed. Promptly at 8, the sound of wagon wheels announced Wade's arrival. He appeared at the door hatless, his hair slightly damp as if freshly washed, wearing a clean shirt and his least worn pair of denims, details that suggested he had taken special care with his appearance that morning. "Morning, Mrs. Foster children," he greeted them, his smile brightening the small room. All ready to go, with George's grudging help, the trunks were loaded into the wagon. The actual moment of departure was somewhat anticlimactic. George offered a stiff handshake to Rebecca, and awkward pats on the head to the children, then retreated into his reclaimed solitude with evident relief. The journey to the Double X Ranch took just over an hour, following a well-maintained road that wound north through rolling hills. As they traveled, Wade pointed out landmarks and neighboring properties, creating a map of their new surroundings for Rebecca and the children. "That's the Parker place over there," he indicated a distant farmhouse. "Good folks. They have children about your age," he added, glancing at Thomas and Mary. "And over that ridge is Caleb Johnson's spread. He runs sheep, not cattle, but we get along well enough despite the traditional rivalry." Rebecca, seated beside him on the wagon bench with Lily on her lap, found herself enjoying the scenery and Wade's commentary in equal measure. The land was beautiful green with spring growth, dotted with wildflowers and framed by distant mountains, so different from the crowded streets of St. Louis, yet somehow it already felt more like home than the city had in recent years. "And there it is," Wade announced finally as they crested a gentle hill. "The Double X." Below them, a valley opened up, bisected by a clear running stream. Near the center, sheltered by a grove of tall oaks, stood a substantial two-story house painted white with green trim. Nearby were several outbuildings, a large barn, what appeared to be a bunkhouse, and various sheds and corrals. Cattle grazed in the surrounding pastures, and a small herd of horses was visible in a paddock close to the barn. "It's beautiful," Rebecca said sincerely, taking in the peaceful scene. Wade's expression was a mixture of pride and something more vulnerable. "I hope you'll be happy here." The children could hardly contain their excitement as the wagon rolled down the hill toward the house. Thomas peppered Wade with questions about the horses, while Mary wanted to know about the garden, and Lily simply bounced on Rebecca's lap, pointing at everything that caught her eye. As they approached the house, the front door opened, and a woman stepped onto the porch, not Wade Xavier, as Rebecca had half expected, but a middle-aged Mexican woman with a round, pleasant face and salt and pepper hair braided into a crown around her head. "That's Elena Garcia," Wade explained. "She comes in 3 days a week to cook and help with the housekeeping. Her husband, Miguel, is my foreman. You'll meet him later." Elena welcomed them with a warm smile and rapid-fire Spanish that made Wade laugh. "She says the house has been waiting too long for a woman's touch and children's laughter," he translated. Inside, the house was even more impressive than it had appeared from the outside. The rooms were spacious and well-proportioned, furnished with a blend of practical ranch-style pieces and finer items that must have been brought in from San Francisco or beyond. Everything was scrupulously clean, though Rebecca noted touches that suggested recent, hasty preparations, fresh flowers in vases, new curtains that still showed fold marks, a rocking chair by the fireplace that looked as if it had just been delivered. "I took the liberty of having a few things brought in," Wade said, following her gaze. Aunt Harriet helped with the selections. It's all lovely, Rebecca assured him, touched by the effort he had made. The tour continued upstairs, where Wade showed them the bedrooms he had prepared. The master bedroom, clearly intended for Rebecca, was spacious and airy, with a large four-poster bed and a dressing table by the window. Adjacent to it were two smaller but equally well-appointed rooms, one for Thomas, with blue curtains and a small desk, and another for the girls, where pink and white checked curtains framed the windows and two matching beds stood side by side. I wasn't sure about the colors, Wade admitted, watching anxiously as the children explored their new domains. Aunt Harriet thought the girls might like pink, but if you prefer something else. It's perfect, Rebecca said softly, watching Mary run her hand reverently over the quilt on her bed. All of it, I don't know how to thank you. Wade's expression softened. Seeing the house filled with life again is thanks enough. He cleared his throat, suddenly businesslike. I'll bring up your trunks and then perhaps you'd like some time to settle in. Alina has prepared lunch for whenever you're ready. The rest of the day passed in a whirl of unpacking and exploration. The children, after initial shyness, quickly adapted to their new surroundings. Thomas discovered the barn and the horses, Mary found the garden, and Lily attached herself to Alina, who seemed delighted by the child's interest in her cooking. Wade, true to his word, moved his personal belongings to the bunkhouse, though he took his meals at the main house to keep things proper, as he explained. The arrangement, while unusual, seemed to work smoothly. Wade was an unobtrusive presence available when needed, but never imposing, careful to give Rebecca and the children space to adjust to their new home. In the evening, after the children were tucked into their new beds, Rebecca found herself sitting on the front porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The night was peaceful, the air fragrant with the scent of spring blossoms from the nearby orchard. The sound of boots on the porch steps made her turn. Wade approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might like this, he said, offering one to her. First night in a new place can be unsettling. Rebecca accepted the cup gratefully. Thank you. Though I must say it feels surprisingly right to be here. Wade settled into a chair beside her, his long legs stretched out before him. I'm glad to hear that. They sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping their coffee and watching the moon rise over the distant hills. May I ask you something? Rebecca said finally. Of course. Why did you offer us this place? Really? She turned to look at him directly. It's such an extraordinarily generous thing to do for strangers. Wade was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. When I saw you step down from that stagecoach, he said slowly, with your children gathered around you looking so brave and so tired all at once, something just clicked into place. I can't explain it better than that. He glanced at her. I built this house for a family. It stood empty too long. The simple honesty of his answer touched Rebecca deeply. Still, most men wouldn't have opened their homes this way. A smile quirked the corner of his mouth. Aunt Harriet would tell you I'm not like most men. No, Rebecca agreed softly. You're not. Another comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant hooting of an owl and the gentle creaking of their rocking chairs. It's getting late, Wade said eventually, rising to his feet. I should let you get some rest. Tomorrow's Sunday. Would you like to attend church? I can have the wagon ready by 9. Rebecca nodded. The children would enjoy that, and I should thank your aunt in person for her help with the house. She'll be pleased to see you, Wade assured her. Good night, Rebecca. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. Good night, Wade. As she prepared for bed in her new room, Rebecca found herself reflecting on the strange path that had brought her to this place. 3 months ago, she had been a grieving widow in St. Louis, facing an uncertain future. Now she was establishing a new life in California, working at a job she enjoyed, and living in a beautiful home provided by a man who was rapidly becoming. What? A friend, certainly. Perhaps something more, given time. The thought should have alarmed her. It was too soon after James's death for such feelings. But as she drifted off to sleep, Rebecca found herself looking forward to the days ahead with a lightness of heart she hadn't experienced in years. The weeks that followed settled into a comfortable routine. Each morning, Wade drove Rebecca and the children to town, where she worked at Mrs. Chen's shop while the children either stayed with her or, increasingly often, spent time with new friends under the watchful eye of various town mothers. In the evenings, Wade collected them and returned to the ranch, where Alina usually had dinner waiting. After the meal, there were often simple family activities, reading aloud from one of James's old books, playing games, or sometimes just sitting on the porch watching the sunset. Wade joined them most evenings, his presence becoming so natural that Rebecca could hardly remember a time when he hadn't been part of their daily lives. The children adored him. Thomas followed Wade around the ranch whenever possible, soaking up knowledge about horses and cattle with avid interest. Wade had begun teaching him to ride, a process that filled the boy with pride and determination. Mary had discovered a love for gardening and spent hours with Wade planning new flower beds and vegetable patches. Even Lily, normally shy with strangers, had taken to climbing into Wade's lap during story time, her small hand trustingly placed in his much larger one. Rebecca watched these interactions with a mixture of gratitude and growing affection. Wade was unfailingly patient, treating each child's interests and concerns with genuine respect. He never tried to replace their father. Indeed, he often encouraged them to share memories of James, but he was steadily becoming an important figure in their lives nonetheless. As for Rebecca's own feelings, she found them increasingly difficult to categorize. Wade was a friend, certainly, and a generous benefactor. But there were moments a glance held too long across the dinner table, his hand steadying her as she stepped down from the wagon, the warmth in his voice when he spoke her name that suggested the possibility of something deeper developing between them. One evening in late May, about a month after they had moved to the ranch, Rebecca found Wade in the garden after the children were asleep. He was standing by the new rose bushes he had brought from town the previous week, apparently lost in thought. "Penny for them," she said softly, approaching him. Wade turned, a smile lighting his face at the sight of her. "Just admiring these roses. They remind me of the ones my mother grew when I was a boy." He hesitated, then added, "And thinking about how different this place feels with you and the children here. Different in a good way, I hope, the best way." His gaze was warm as it rested on her face. "I never realized how empty it was before." Rebecca felt a familiar flutter in her chest. "We're the ones who should be grateful. You've given us so much." Wade shook his head. "You've given me a purpose beyond just running cattle and turning a profit. Watching Thomas learn to ride, helping Mary with her garden, hearing Lily's laughter, those things can't be measured in dollars and cents." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. Without thinking, Rebecca reached out and touched his arm. "Thank you for making us feel so welcome, so at home here." Wade's hand came up to cover hers, warm and strong. "Rebecca," he began, his voice low and serious, "I know it hasn't been very long since James passed, and I don't want to rush you or make you uncomfortable. But I want you to know that my feelings for you and the children have grown far beyond simple neighborliness." Rebecca's heart quickened. "Wade," he shook his head gently. You don't need to say anything now. I just wanted you to know where I stand. If you're ready to consider a future together, I'll be here." The moment was interrupted by a call from the house. Alina, who had stayed late to help with some mending, was ready to return to her own home in the bunkhouse complex. "I should go," Wade said, reluctantly releasing Rebecca's hand. "Think about what I said. No pressure, no rush. Just know that my offer to make this arrangement permanent is there whenever you're ready." As Rebecca lay in bed that night, sleep eluded her. Wade's words echoed in her mind, along with the memory of his hand covering hers, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. Was she ready to consider a future with him? It had been only 6 months since James died, and propriety suggested she should observe at least a year of mourning. But James himself had urged her, in their final conversations, not to cling to grief. "Live fully, Becca," he had whispered, his once strong voice faded to a thread. "Find happiness again. Promise me." She had promised, though at the time it had seemed an impossible task. Now, with Wade Xavier's unspoken offer hanging between them, that promise took on new meaning. The following Sunday, Rebecca sought out Harriet Xavier after church. The older woman greeted her warmly, clearly pleased by the improving health and spirits of Rebecca and the children. "Wade looks happier than I've seen him in years," Harriet observed as they watched him across the churchyard, where he was showing Thomas how to properly tie a quick-release knot. "Having you all at the ranch has been good for him. He's been more than generous to us," Rebecca said. "I don't know how we can ever repay him." Harriet gave her a shrewd look. "I think you know exactly how, my dear. The question is whether you're ready." Rebecca felt herself blush. "Is it that obvious? Only to someone who knows Wade as well as I do." Harriet patted her hand reassuringly. "And for what it's worth, I think James would approve. He always wanted what was best for you and the children." "It seems too soon," Rebecca confessed. "People will talk." Harriet sniffed dismissively. "People always talk. The question is whether you'll let their opinions determine your happiness." She fixed Rebecca with a penetrating gaze. "Do you care for my nephew?" "Yes," Rebecca admitted softly. "More than I expected to. More than I thought possible after James." "Then don't waste time worrying about what others might think. Life is too short for that I should know." Harriet's expression softened. "Wade has waited 5 years to find someone who makes him feel this way again. Don't make him wait too much longer." The conversation left Rebecca thoughtful. That evening, after the children were asleep, she sought Wade out on the porch, where he often sat with a cup of coffee before retiring to the bunkhouse. "May I join you?" she asked, stepping through the doorway. Wade immediately rose, gesturing to the chair beside his. "Always." They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, listening to the night sounds: crickets, the distant lowing of cattle, an occasional snort from the horses in the paddock. "I spoke with your aunt today," Rebecca said finally. Wade glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "Should I be worried?" "Aunt Harriet has been known to speak her mind rather forcefully." Rebecca smiled. "She was actually quite helpful. She helped me clarify some things I've been thinking about." "Oh." Wade's tone was carefully neutral, but she could sense the tension in him. "About us," Rebecca continued, gathering her courage. "About the future." Wade set his coffee cup down slowly. "And what conclusions did you reach?" Rebecca took a deep breath. "That life is indeed too short to waste time on unnecessary waiting, that James would want me to be happy. That the children deserve a complete family again." She looked directly at him. "That I care for you, Wade, in a way I never expected to care for anyone after James died." The hope that blazed in Wade's eyes took her breath away. "Rebecca," he said, her name almost a prayer on his lips. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" I'm saying that if your offer still stands, if you truly want a ready-made family with 3 children and a widow who's still finding her way in this new place, then yes, I would be honored to consider a future together. Wade reached for her hand, his own trembling slightly. Nothing would make me happier, he said, his voice husky with emotion. I love you, Rebecca. I think I've loved you since I first saw you step down from that stagecoach, looking so brave and so vulnerable all at once. Even with 3 children in tow, she asked, half joking, half serious. Especially with 3 children in tow, Wade answered without hesitation. I told you then, and I meant it. I've got space in my heart for all of you. The simple sincerity of his words brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. Wade reached up gently to wipe them away, his touch infinitely tender. May I court you properly, Rebecca Foster, with the intention of making you my wife when you're ready? Rebecca nodded, her heart too full for words. Wade's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains as he leaned forward slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished. When she didn't, he pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both gentle and full of promise. When they finally parted, Wade kept her hand in his expression serious. We'll take this at your pace, he promised. No rushing, no pressure. The children come first always. They already adore you, Rebecca assured him. But yes, we should move carefully for their sake. They agreed to a formal courtship period of 3 months, after which, if all went well, they would announce their engagement. Wade would continue to sleep in the bunkhouse until they were married, maintaining proprieties despite their changed relationship. The following months were some of the happiest of Rebecca's life. Wade courted her with old-fashioned courtesy flowers from town, small, thoughtful gifts, rides to scenic spots on the ranch where they could talk privately. Their growing closeness seemed to delight everyone around them. Harriet, who had clearly been hoping for this outcome. Elena and Miguel, whose obvious affection for Wade extended easily to Rebecca and the children. Mrs. Chen, who nodded approvingly when Wade began escorting Rebecca to and from the shop each day. Even Sheriff Mitchell, not known for his romantic sensibilities, commented gruffly one Sunday after church. "'Bout time Xavier found himself a good woman. You'll do well together." The children's reactions to the changing relationship between their mother and Wade varied according to their ages and temperaments. Thomas, at 8, was old enough to understand the implications and serious enough to consider them carefully. "Would you be our father then?" he asked Wade directly one evening, after Rebecca had explained in simple terms that she and Wade were developing feelings for each other. Wade considered the question with equal seriousness. "I would be your mother's husband, and I would care for you as a father does. But I would never try to replace your real father in your hearts or memories. Is that something you could accept?" Thomas nodded slowly. "I think Papa would like you. He always said taking care of family was the most important job a man could have." "Your father was a wise man," Wade said sincerely. "And I promise you, Thomas, I will always do my best to take care of your mother and you children." Mary's primary concern was whether they would continue to live at the ranch. "I don't want to leave my garden," she declared. "Or Thunder and the other horses." Wade assured her that the ranch was their home now, regardless of what happened between him and Rebecca. Lily, at 4, had the simplest reaction of all. "Does this mean you'll read me stories every night?" she asked Wade hopefully. "If that's what you'd like," he promised, his eyes suspiciously bright. By the end of the agreed-upon courtship period, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that Wade and Rebecca would marry. The only question was when and how formal the wedding should be. "Nothing elaborate," Rebecca insisted when Harriet began suggesting increasingly grand celebrations. A simple ceremony with family and close friends is all we need, Wade agreed. The important thing is making it official, not putting on a show for the whole county. They settled on a date in early September, when the summer heat would be fading and the ranch work would be less demanding. Pastor Williams would perform the ceremony at the church in Petaluma, followed by a reception at Harriet's house in town. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with just a hint of autumn crispness in the air. Rebecca stood before the mirror in Harriet's guest room, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Mrs. Chen had insisted on making her wedding dress as a gift, a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was arranged in a soft updo, with a few curls framing her face, and she wore her grandmother's cameo at her throat. "You look beautiful, Mama," Mary said from the doorway, resplendent herself in a new dress of pale blue cotton, like a princess in a storybook. Rebecca smiled at her daughter in the mirror. "Thank you, sweetheart. Are your brother and sister ready?" Mary nodded. "Thomas has been ready for hours. He's helping Mr. Xavier with his tie. And Lily is with Miss Harriet, practicing how to throw flower petals." The thought of Wade struggling with his tie while Thomas offered solemn advice made Rebecca's heart swell with love for both of them. How fortunate she was to have found this man who not only loved her, but embraced her children as his own. The ceremony itself was brief but deeply moving. Rebecca would always remember the look on Wade's face as she walked down the aisle toward him, her children preceding her, Thomas serious and proud in his new suit, Mary and Lily scattering rose petals from the ranch garden. The love and wonder in his eyes made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but spoken with such evident sincerity that more than one handkerchief was required among the guests. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, and Wade leaned down to kiss her, Rebecca felt a sense of rightness, of coming home, that brought joyful tears to her eyes. The reception at Harriet's house was a lively affair, with good food, music, and dancing. The children were the center of attention, especially Lily, who declared to anyone who would listen that Mama and Wade are married now, and we're a real family. Late in the afternoon, as the celebration continued, Wade drew Rebecca aside for a moment of privacy in Harriet's garden. "Happy, Mrs. Xavier?" he asked, his arms around her waist. "Blissfully," she assured him, reaching up to touch his face. "I never expected to find love again, especially not so soon. You've given me and the children a new beginning, a new home." Wade's smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And you've given me the family I always wanted. Do you remember what I said to you that first day when you arrived in Petaluma?" Rebecca nodded. "I've got space in my heart for all," she quoted softly. "I meant it then, and I mean it even more now," Wade told her, his voice husky with emotion. "My heart is full to bursting with love for you and those children." As if on cue, they heard Lily calling for them, her high, sweet voice cutting through the general conversation. "Mama, Wade. Where are you? It's time for cake." They exchanged a smile, the private communication of two people who understood and accepted the beautiful chaos of family life. "We're coming, sweetheart," Wade called back, offering his arm to his new wife. "Shall we, Mrs. Xavier? Our family awaits." Hand in hand, they returned to the celebration, to the beginning of their new life together, a life built on courage, kindness, and the space in one cowboy's heart that was just waiting to be filled by a widow and her 3 children. 2 years later, Rebecca stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching Wade teach Thomas the finer points of roping a calf in the nearby corral. At 10, Thomas was showing a natural aptitude for ranch work, absorbing Wade's lessons with serious concentration. Mary, now 8, was tending her garden with the same dedication, her vegetable patch having expanded to include a variety of herbs and flowers. 6-year-old Lily was helping Alina in the kitchen, though her assistance likely created more work than it saved. And in Rebecca's arms, 3-month-old James Wade Xavier slept peacefully, his tiny hand curled around his mother's finger. Born the previous spring, the baby had his father's blue eyes and his mother's dimpled smile, a perfect blend of his parents. Life on the Double X ranch had settled into a rhythm that suited them all. Rebecca still worked with Mrs. Chen 3 days a week, having proven herself invaluable to the aging dressmaker. Wade had expanded the ranch operations, adding more cattle and horses with Thomas's enthusiastic assistance. The house itself had seen a few changes, a new wing added to accommodate their growing family, fresh paint, curtains made by Rebecca's own hands. But the greatest change was in Rebecca herself. The uncertain widow who had stepped down from the stagecoach that day in Petaluma was gone, replaced by a confident woman who knew her own worth and place in the world. She had found not just shelter but love, not just a provider but a partner, not just a home for her children but a man who cherished them as his own. As if sensing her thoughts, Wade looked up from his lesson with Thomas and smiled at her, a smile that still made her heart skip a beat even after 2 years of marriage. He said something to Thomas, then crossed the yard to join her on the porch, his long strides eating up the distance between them. "How's our little cowboy?" he asked, peering down at the sleeping baby. "Dreaming of horses, no doubt," Rebecca replied, leaning into him as his arm came around her shoulders. "Like father, like son." Wade pressed a kiss to her temple. "Been thinking," he said, his tone casual but with an undercurrent of excitement. "Maybe it's time to start planning that trip to San Francisco we talked about. All of us together, our first real family vacation." Rebecca looked up at him, seeing the love and contentment in his eyes that mirrored her own feelings. "That sounds wonderful," she agreed, "though traveling with 5 children might be quite an adventure." 5? Wade's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Last I counted, we had 4. Rebecca smiled mysteriously. "For now, but come December we'll need to make room for one more." The joy that blazed across Wade's face was everything she could have wished for. "Really?" "You're certain?" Dr. Harmon confirmed it yesterday, she told him. "Another little Xavier to join our family." Wade gathered her and the baby close, mindful not to wake little James. "I am the luckiest man alive," he declared, his voice thick with emotion. "When you stepped down from that stagecoach with 3 children and not much else, I had no idea you'd bring so much happiness into my life." Rebecca stretched up to kiss him softly. "And I had no idea that the kindness of a stranger would lead to all of this. A home, a family, a love I never expected to find again." From the corral, Thomas called for Wade's attention, eager to demonstrate his newly practiced skill. From the garden, Mary's voice floated on the breeze as she sang to her plants. From the kitchen window came the sound of Lily's laughter mingled with Alina's patient instructions in both English and Spanish. And in Rebecca's arms, baby James stirred and opened his eyes, gazing up at his parents with perfect trust and contentment. "Go on," Rebecca urged Wade with a smile. "Thomas is waiting. I'll be right here." Wade kissed her once more before returning to the corral, his steps light, his shoulders straight with pride and purpose. Rebecca watched him go, this man who had opened his heart and his home to a widow and her children, this man who had become father, husband, and partner in creating a new life from the ashes of her old one. "I've got space in my heart for all," he had said that first day. And how abundantly that promise had been fulfilled for all of them.